Okay, well listen, a lot to be told over the next 45 minutes, which we started late. This is an update of what's been going on with the SAV monitoring for the Chesapeake Bay. This is a kind of a tag team approach, so I'll be covering upfront what's been going on and some interesting components to it. It's not going to be a lot of data, but there's some interesting components, and then Brooke's going to follow up, and then of course Dick Zimmerman's here to give a very interesting talk in some of the light ocean acidification issues. So with that, to make sure that we're all on the same page with regard to the SAV monitoring program, we use aerial photographs that cover the entire shoreline of the Chesapeake Bay. This again is something that we've been doing since 1984 on an annual basis, except 1988. We use aerial imagery with a contractor that flies out of Martinsburg, West Virginia, and fortuitously they were out yesterday and covered this entire region, and then this morning they flew this entire region here, the lower bay, where we have eelgrass and widgeon grass. And it's an interesting story the way we work with them, because the conditions under which we fly, low wind, minimal cloud cover, low tide, low turbidity, low sun angle, have been getting more complicated as we've moved through this period of climate change. So whereas we've had several days to fly when a front would go through, we don't get those big fronts coming through anymore bringing big winds. It's just been very little. So we have a complicated story to tell, but need the required conditions. So the first step in this annual monitoring is our acquisition phase. And no matter what kind of sensor you have, if the conditions are not like this, I don't care. You need the right days. So with that, what we do, as you know, we report SAV data for the entire Bay region by segments. As you know, there are lots of Bay segments. So in our report, and what I'll be showing you today is just a kind of a window on some of those segments that I think are really important that we want to follow up. Some that are certainly going to be important for Dick's talk. And we've got them color coded. So we've got low salinity, high salinity, oligohaline, polyhaline areas. With regard to each of these segments, they have a restoration target that was based on the single best year of SAV in that particular segment. So as I roll through these, you'll see the change in SAV in each of these particular segments that I've chosen today. And I haven't done all those because we would be here for the rest of the morning. So I'm just showing you kind of representative portion of these segments that I think typify types of things that we're seeing here in the Bay right now. I don't know why this is going. So this is a typical digital image that we get from the aerial photography, and I'm not sure if you see it, but the area outlined in red is the SAV polygon that we draw, and we use a Braun-Boucquet density scale to identify of those polygons, a classification from low density to high density. And so, as you can tell, here's the scale. These dense areas here are classified as a density 4, and then offshore areas that are density 1. And it's really important because this tells us a lot about what's happening in a particular system, because not just total numbers are important, it's what happens within the bed that we feel is crucial to understanding the dynamics of these particular populations. So that's what we see, that's what we get from our contractor that flies out of Martinsburg, West Virginia, Air Photographics. And it's a firm that's very receptive to flying under kind of strange conditions. Like I usually talk to them about 5:30 in the morning when they fly. We talk 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, Saturday, Sunday, whatever day it is, Memorial Day. When they're flying, we're talking 24/7. And it's the only way we get good imagery, because conditions change on a 24-hour basis. So number one step, get good imagery, or else the rest of it falls apart from that point on. The data have been used in a lot of different components. Of course, the first one is large regional changes. This is what everyone sees when we put out a report. But we also try to communicate those changes to people because the public is really interested in the Bay. And this is one of those sentinel species. Bill and I talk about the canary in the coal mine. With all the work Bill and I have done over years since we first became colleagues and friends, it's the canary in the coal mine. It's one of those few sentinel species that tells us how water clarity, water quality are doing. And these plants, as we're seeing, respond really quickly to changes in water quality. We've also learned a lot about biology and ecology over the last couple of decades. Importantly, how they spread, how they disperse, and we've got some research that Dick will be talking about, some modeling, and what are the conditions that are necessary for these plants to continue to grow, and the stresses that are coming to seagrasses with the impacts of climate change. And multiple users. It's not just the public, it's not the managers. I mean, we have many other groups that use aquaculturists, Army Corps looking at permits, and these annual data are really important for some of these permits, which I'll highlight a couple examples when we get towards the end of the talk. So let's start off. This is the Bay-wide picture of what we've been seeing with SAV populations. I've broken down the Bay-wide figure into color codes. So the green are populations of SAV in the polyhaline, and we're going to follow this format through the subsequent 6 or 7 talks, slides. So green is what's happening in the lower bay. Yellow is the mid-bay, which is a big chunk of the bay, and that's where some of the biggest changes are occurring. The dark blue is the oligohaline area, a much smaller area of the bay, and then the lighter blue is the tidal freshwater areas, like the Susquehanna Flats, which has been in the focus of a lot of people's interest over the last few years. So that's the picture, and as you can see, ups and downs with the bay-wide trends, but again, if you look at the 2015 data, this was the big year of which we saw the most significant increase in SAV populations. And of course, what you can see are these dramatic changes. I mean, this is huge. People say, how come you see these big changes every single year, which is what we're going to get to in the talk, why we see those. And you'll see some of the pictures we see, because I look at every single picture. It's been part of my life. I've lived, breathed, ate SAV imagery, as well as eat the grass. But that's the picture. That's it. So let's look a little bit more at this. And so this is broken down just for your interest by salinity zone, so you can see the data a little more closely as to what happens. So here's the tidal fresh. You know, this is the big change in the Susquehanna Flats. The 2011-12 was the SAV abundance following Irene and Lee. That bed, which was studied by Cassie Gerbes, who just finished her dissertation, showed that the support of the big bed provided the resilience necessary to keep that bed alive and well. It is slowly coming back. There's the oligohaline zone, but one thing, notice the numbers, hectares difference in each of these. So that's 0 to 10,000. The oligohaline 0 to 6. This is mesohaline, 0 to 20,000. That's where the biggest changes are occurring. And it's because of one species, which I'll show you, is widgeon grass. Think about, I mean, the dynamics of this species is phenomenal, and we're still trying to understand what's contributing to that particular change. The polyhaline area is a really interesting story because you see some very interesting trends going on here, and I put this component hot, and I think Dick's going to probably address some of that, so I'm hoping that my lead-in is going to be, you can pay me back by buying me a beer, okay? But, 3 time periods, 2010, 2015, 2005, 2010, and 2015, were hot periods, and you can see what's happened with SAV in the lower bay. We're expecting, unfortunately, to see that happen this year in 2016. We've already been out to some of those areas ground truthing, and we're seeing some of those changes already in terms of minimal populations in some of those areas. So that's the big picture by salinity zone, and we'll move on, and it's getting color coded. This is all in our executive summary, so if you haven't seen it, it's there through 2015. So let's kind of look at least maybe representative segments. I did not want to give you 30 slides just show this, because that's not where I want to go with this, and it's not where I want to end, because we've got to leave some time for Brooke to tell you about the future, which is in jeopardy. So here's the gunpowder SAV area. I mean, we met the goal a couple years, then went down, up and down. These trends are pretty true, because actually I've been to some of these areas in the gunpowder, and one year you couldn't get a boat through some of these SAV beds, the next year gone. So these are pretty good trends, and we're starting to see an enhancement of SAV again. The one thing I want you to notice, though, look at the period from 78 through the mid-80s. Very little SAV, because remember Agnes, that's the tipping point of the bay when we brought populations of SAV to what we called an unprecedented decline of SAV in the bay. So all these pictures, take a look at this part of the graph, and then look what's going on in terms of these dramatic changes. But picture in many of these cases are still going up. That's the gunpowder. This is the mid-bay. This is kind of, you can't see it, but this is a small area here. Again, there was a big change here in 79. We're not sure what happened, but generally low populations, but we're starting to see ups and downs, but the general trend seems to be going up in the mid-bay area, which is this little section here. And again, the x-axis, y-axis is going to change by how much SAV is, and then everyone has a goal, and everyone has a feature. So this is the oligohaline, which is why that's blue. This is our favorite section, the Susquehanna Flats. Again, very low here, started to come back, and then wham, it was just took off. It was just crazy. And watching the aerial photography, over those years was just impressive. And we kept on telling people, look what's going on in the flats. And Mike Kemp from the Horn Point took that as a task and had a really good student, Cassie, who's done some really nice work. But then we had Irene and Lee, back down. But again, that bed was big, it was resilient. And that resilience factor is really important. Bigger is better. Not always the case, but now starting to rebound through 2015. And that bed is just incredible. If you haven't been to the flats, kayak out there, it's incredible. You may not be able to get the kayak through some areas because it's so thick. But the flats, and we'll talk a little bit about it, and Cassie's done some nice work, but that's the flats. This is the Elk. This is kind of another cool story because right next to the flats, look at that. Above the restoration target for many, many years, bam, Irene and Lee just knocked it out. And while the flats persisted, again, while this is a large amount, these are narrow fringing beds along the entire river. They're not big as the flats were, and got knocked back. But look at the change. Just in it's phenomenal. I've shown some pictures of how this has changed. Off the charts, really cool.
JJ, is that coming back from seeds or vegetative?
I believe it's got to be both from seeds and how they disperse, because this is mostly wild. Well, let's go. Whoops.
It's mostly Valsinaria.
Okay. Here's one small area of the Elk River. Here's the grass beds in 2014, and this was in black and white. You may not be able to see really well, but if you're looking at this on your computer, this is one big dense bed. That's in 1 year time. Now, it's possible that there were some propagules there, but these plants, like wild celery and some of the other species are there, incredibly productive, and they put out seeds. They germinate like really early, like mid-spring. Some of the val plants have already started to germinate. Their growth rates are phenomenal. So my bet is that a lot of the recovery occurs via seeds. And we know from eelgrass and what we've been seeing in the coastal bays and what we watch in the bay. And now that we know, and this is part of the SAB ecology biology that has kind of transfigured all this stuff, it's got to be seeds. And how they disperse, that's the other cool thing, is how these plants do what they do and how quickly they get to those sites is really cool. Which tells us again that if the SAB is not challenged by water quality, bam, they take over. Now there are some new issues that I'm sure you're going to hit upon, which is the warming and the acidification. So I don't want to take any of your thunder. I'll leave it for there. So again, that's 2 beer.
Before you move on, can I just point out, so this is actually one of our donor beds for Valsinaria seeds. And last summer we collected from this bed. It was amazing. Like the number of seed pods, we collected several 5-gallon buckets.
I mean, to see this, again, this is what we see, and I just wish that there was some visual way of showing all this. It's impressive to see the annual changes. It's cool. It's cool. It really is. And again, this is one big dense bed, which has very interesting signatures. So the idea of having a classification system for these signatures is tough, because this is like so dense. The plants are at the surface. They're essentially, reflective of all the light. But then as you get into deeper water, the plants are upright and have a very different signature. So let's move on. That's the elk. This is our chop tank, and again, up and down, up and down. All this is dominated by one species, widgeon grass, which is the species of the day, species of the bay, species of the future. It dominates the mid-bay area, which is why you see such great changes. But the chop tank has been growing really well, and in places that we've never seen widgeon grass ever before in the historical survey. So it's really crazy about what the species is doing. And I want to show you this picture. Okay, so this is off Claiborne. Here's SAV in 2014, and the whole shoreline is now covered. And that's just 1 year. Again, this is what we see when people say, how can all this happen? It does. These plants are truly incredible. Now this again is a native species, but we see this with a lot of the other species also. So this, my friends, is one of the coolest pictures around. I'm not sure if you can see this, but see all those little donuts? That's all widgeon grass. So when we do the interpretation, a lot of people say, how do you know it's grass? Well, with widgeon grass, when it colonizes, and this is a colonizing feature, those are all donuts. Rich, most of you know Rich about his donut stories, so this is in his honor. But these are 2 different locations, and even in places that just have a few of these donuts, it tells us that this is widgeon grass. This is unbelievable. It's the coolest picture I think I've ever seen about how this species colonizes and grows. And then of course, once it becomes one big bed, we lose the donut feature. But it's a way that we use to interpret and make sure we understand that what we map is seagrass. And that obviously is something, or SAV, it is something that we are concerned about to make sure that we are interpreting our imagery correctly. So that's going to be there. I just love that picture. It's just so neat to watch, to see. So I'm going to have to give that and frame it to Rich with a donut. Okay, so now we're going to move down to the midland areas. And again, this is the color code. It's Tangier. And you're seeing some interesting trends here because in Tangier Island, we start to pick up our two species, eelgrass and widgeongrass combined. And this up and down, believe it or not, is coupled to what's been going on with eelgrass, which I'm going to bring in a bit on the talk. So, up and down, but here's this big increase because we saw quite a bit of widgeongrass in the Tangier area this year. And again, dramatic changes in such a short time period. Okay, now we're going to loop down to the lower bay, the western shore, and this is where we now pick up the lower bay eelgrass, and this is the concern that we've been highlighting for years, where we saw a rapid increase in eelgrass over time, dropping off again, up and down, and then of course here's the 2005 time period right there, and it drops off to very little, then up and down, and then 2010, another heat situation, drops off, and this repetitive heat recovery is something that concerns us because 2 years in a row could mean a devastating result for eelgrass in the lower bay. So that's kind of the big picture. I want to kind of move into some other areas why I want to highlight this is because of the importance of this annual monitoring. And this is where Brooks is going to go because we are looking at a major concern with the 2016 survey. But I want to highlight a couple things about the biology and ecology component before we move on to the very end. We've done a lot of status and trends work. Bill and I were involved in we'll call it kind of a NCEAS program back in 2006-07, where we looked at the trends based on some of the water quality standards, and we found that, for example, the upper Patuxent and the lower Potomac were all tied to nitrogen loads. So the nitrogen story is really interesting, and unfortunately, that was done in 2006. There have been some local analysis, the Choptank, Susquehanna Flats, Potomac, and some of the sub-estuaries by CERC, but there's been no bay-wide analysis, since 2006. But we think that this holds true. The lowest bay salinity areas, we believe, is being driven by light. And I'm going to show you why we think that is with the eelgrass story. So let me tell you about the eelgrass story. What we did, we took all the SAV data for the lower bay. We said, okay, where are the areas that are dominated by eelgrass? And we broke it down into these three segments: lower western shore, lower eastern shore, and Tangier. Compared that with some of the water quality data from that, and said, okay, what's been happening with eelgrass in the lower bay? Because it is by far the dominant, most important species in the lower bay. And it's persistent because it has a very significant root rhizome system that allows it to persist. So here are the trends based on our data, based on total cover, the mean depth, and the distance from shore. And it's quite obvious to all of you that the amount of eelgrass in these segments is going down. If you look at the mean depth, it's getting into shallower locations. And if you look at the little kind of squiggly lines, it is happening in all of the three segments that we have. And mean distance from shore. So it's moving from deeper water into shallow water, moving from offshore to inshore. Those data are real. And that's what concerns us about the future of eelgrass in the bay, because it's being driven by what else but light. Now, these are the water quality data, and I will just mention that gentleman that's here with me, John Lefchek, is now working on this as part of the first status and trends paper about what's been happening with eelgrass. But in generally, the light's been getting much worse. So here's the total bay: lower eastern shore, lower western shore, and Tangier. And you can see the light characteristics are all in one direction. Although there's a lot of noise, the general direction is down. And I know that this issue is going to be part of a big workshop that Rich has put together, and I'm hoping that by that point of time, we'll have this worked up out to a journal, and we're going to be looking at the bay-wide data on top of that. The other big issue facing eelgrass: temperature. This is the bay-wide temperature. Eelgrass is a species that likes it cold. Those 2 hot summers really screwed it up. and we have the 15 that was also not as much of a concern because there's still quite a bit of eelgrass. When we had the dieback in 2005, there wasn't hardly a blade of eelgrass left around the bay. Now it recovered from seed, and there were some meristems that survived, so it came back from both, but the seeds were the big picture. And of course, knowing that it takes 2 years for a seed to get to a flowering plant to produce seeds, 2 years back-to-back herding of eelgrass really will be devastating to the populations because we're going to be losing the seed bank. And we know that again because, again, we've spent a lot of time understanding the biology, the ecology, not just of eelgrass, but some of the other species. So big issue there. So yeah, so there's the graphic. There are the 3 time periods, and you can see, what happens when you have that heat. Drops off quickly, and again, this is total bay, but it does include here widgeon grass. But the big picture is because it's all tied to the amount of eelgrass down there. So with that, okay, so another thing that we do, because the imagery doesn't tell us what the species are, okay, that shapefile that we put together was based on our best knowledge of where the grass goes, but we also want to know what's happening on the ground. So, we use a lot of ground data from the citizens, and want to comment on a thing that Brooke is doing. We were trying to bring in all the river keepers, all the observers this year. Brooke's going to have a workshop. It's fantastic. We've got a lot of input from people who want to participate, and we're going to try to collect a lot of ground data. It's kind of what Bill and I talked about many, many years ago of a SavQuest, and we've done some of that, but this is on-the-ground work. So as part of this, we have a group that we go out, and we call it our mini SavQuest. I guess I should give Bill the honor of giving that title before he went down under, and we lost him for a few years. Came back because he just loves the bay. So what we've done, we have 24 transects that are spread across the bay. We have some here on the western shore, a lot there, which is closer to home, so we can get to them. We've got a few over on the eastern shore, and we got a bunch up here on the Dameron Marsh just below Reedville. And what we do every year is, we do transects. We run from inshore to offshore till the bed goes to almost nothing. And so some of our transects will be as short as 200 meters. One of our longest transects is 1,800 meters. It's a little over a mile. And so every 10 meters, we make an observation of percent cover. And again, we use a Braun-McClay scale, very rapid assessment of what's there in terms of whether it's widgeon grass or eelgrass or combined both. And all these observations are made accurately the same spot every single year. We use a Trimble, everything's marked, and so we're looking at the exact same spot every single year. And this is also being embedded in a paper that we're going to be writing up. Again, element 2 of our status and trends. It's going to be kind of cool. So let's look at a few of these transects, because again, widgeon grass and eelgrass do strange things. So here's one. 2008 to 2015, eelgrass is, well, in green, but it's kind of blue, and the widgeon grass is in red. So when we started the transects in 2008, which is 2 years after the dieback, we had quite a bit of eelgrass, but look what's happened over time with Back River. This one transect has gone almost completely from eelgrass and widgeon grass, and especially in this inner area, all the way down now through 2015. 2011 was following the dieback, but we also started to see some changes even before that. And now look at almost all widgeon grass. The eelgrass persists, and actually this is an interesting transect because it goes across a shoal, deep, shallow, deep. So the deep areas here are where we're still finding eelgrass because it's a little bit cooler. This shoal area where we used to have it is maybe a foot at mean low water. So that's one. That's Back River. That's at just off Langley Air Force Base. Now here's other transect that we actually had data from 1978, one of the original transects that we did. And you can see here, eelgrass has persisted over time. Now this is a lower bay, eastern shore, close to the mouth of the bay. If you know something about circulation, water comes up on the east side, spreads out. So we're getting a lot of cool water. So eelgrass has persisted. We've had some widgeon grass pop up every so often, but then it disappears. So it's really a crazy species. So
What about salt?
could be, but this is so close to the mouth of the bay. I don't think that salinity has an issue in this particular transect.
No, I'm just thinking about the eastern shore versus
Well,
shore.
yeah, it could be, but I do know that when you look at the depth distribution, it's always deeper on the bay side than it is in the western shore, which I think is more light than anything else. So I think a lot of what you're doing really is very relevant. So that's Hunger's Creek. Now the last transect this is kind of an interesting place because this Browns Bay is where I basically teethed on grass and used it as dental floss for many, many years. But this is 1978, 94, 96, 98, 2000, 2006. And what you can see is lots of eelgrass, a little bit here, but nothing offshore. By 94, it had spread off to the deeper areas, persisting, and there are some little issues here with some of the data because we had it instead of 10 meters, 20 meters. But eelgrass persisted, but this is the 06 time period. Eelgrass basically disappeared, and while it's trying to come back, it's again disappeared. So it's really almost no part of the Browns Bay transect anymore. And even widgeon grass, I mean, this was like 2015, there was almost no grass there. So this is another site. Now this is just 3 of the 24. All 24 are really weird, but it shows some of the dynamics that occur, which we need to know, not just the aerial coverage, but what's happening within a bed. Because we talk about widgeon grass being the species of the future. Well, what's happened here? It's not even there. And this is really shallow. I mean, this is a place where I did my dissertation work and lived, breathed, died eelgrass for many a year. Spent many an hour with my head onto the water. Anyone who does any seagrass work, you got to be onto the water. Winter, summer. So yeah, I mean, this area, as a matter of fact, I said, when I die, I want my ashes spread over Browns Bay eelgrass. There may not be any eelgrass there. So yeah, it's kind of a cool place, but yeah, our concern there. So that's just 3 of the 24, really, because we have the bay-wide data, but now we're getting species information. And we've talked to Bill maybe of trying to bring back the Southwest Brook. They do some transects in the Upper Bay, but we may want to reconsider that. And it's not a lot of work. This takes us 2 weeks. Doing 24 transects. Okay, we got 4 people, we break up the transect, we've hired some summer interns from William & Mary. It works like a charm. You pick your sites. This is not that hard to do. It is so easy, and the amount of data we get is just awesome. And it shows exactly some of the concerns that we have, not just the change in the species composition, but also the loss of some of our species. So let's talk about multiple uses before we get into brook. We've talked about just the bay-wide coverage and all that, but there are a lot of groups that use our data. 2 of those are, one, there's a lot of interest in aquaculture. If you don't have any knowledge of what's going on, aquaculture is just taken off in the bay. This is clam aquaculture on the bay side of Cherrystone. Go to Google Earth, go to Cape Charles, just cruise up and down up until you get, this is everywhere. And now we're having a lot of oyster aquaculture. Go to the Chop Tank. We see where aquaculture is occurring. It shows up every year. And there's a lot of conflict among where grass is because of the fact that Virginia basically many years ago said, okay, we're not going to allow any more aquaculture permits in areas with existing SAB. And Maryland has the same thing about using our survey to be really careful about where permits are allowed, or even where dredging for clam is allowed. And so, believe it or not, we get on average about 2 requests a week from VMRC. They want to know from us what our best impression is from our data of where grass is, and they will deny now permits. Now, all these permits you saw there in areas that have grass are grandfathered. There's nothing we can do about it. But we play a big role because not just from the annual monitoring, what we try to do is work with aquaculture. So while we say no in existing grass, there are places that have sandbars and edges that don't have grass. So we have told the MRC and the aquaculture people, we're here to help you, but we need the annual monitoring to help us make those decisions with VMRC, and I believe Brook does the same thing. So one big issue. Now there's a lot of other things going on, but that's one use of that data. Not having the annual data looks, because it changes so much. And actually this happened. Here's a good case in point. Many years ago, we saw the imagery and said, God, there's aquaculture nets in the area that had grass. We go out with the officer and all the managers, and they say, there's grass here. How come you put your net down? They were going to make that guy take every one of his clams out of there because there were clams. And he said, wait a minute. I was out here this winter. There wasn't any grass. I said, wait a minute. Why'd you go out in the winter? That's what they do when there's no grass around. So here's what we did. He said, listen, we tried to be really good guys. We told the officers and all, because they were going to have those guys get, hundreds of thousands of dollars of clams out of there. So we said, okay, here's what we'll do. Let them go. We know now how quickly eelgrass recovers. He said, let these guys hang in there for a few years, take those clams out. Once they're finished, get the nets out, and then let them come out with us for 1 year and help us collect seeds. And we'll just help some of the recovery by putting seeds in that area. It came back actually more quickly than we thought. But again, that's how we like to work with aquaculture people. We're sort of the eye in the sky. We watch every blade of grass. and we report this stuff to people when we see something strange. So that's one case. Now, the other one's kind of really cool. We see a lot of propeller scars in the grass beds. This is not as bad in Florida, but look at the scarring. Now, this is that Browns Bay area that I told you where there's almost no grass. That little spot in there is where I spent 3 years of my life doing my dissertation work, and there was a lot of healthy grass. But all these propeller scars happened over a short time period. And we brought that up to the managers, and they said, oh my God, what's going on? Well, everyone was being blamed, and the recreational fishermen, they saw an opportunity for them to come to us, use our data to close grass beds from recreational fishing. So we got our project going to see how quickly this recovered and what we could do to minimize that. So, and we had meetings where the officers had to have guns. There was a lot of really nastiness going on because the recreational people wanted to close because they wanted to fish with speckled trout. The watermen were incensed because they saw VIMs essentially coming out, closing these areas where they haul sting. These are all scars from haul stingers. These are the fishermen that bring these big nets, and these are because they bring their boats in, pull their nets in, and then bunt it and put a small area where they then harvest the fish. So these are scars. So over a couple of years, we worked very closely. We told the recreational fishermen, we watched very closely from the annual survey how these beds recovered, and here's the data from one side. This is some of the most impressive data that we've got to get this published. But we went every year and mapped how many meters of scars we saw. So in this year we saw this many meters. The next year we looked at the same scars, dropped off. By the third year, there's almost no evidence of that scar. So we looked at all these data, and again, here's that time period where it happened. We then worked with VMRC, and they said, okay, let's change the way these watermen work when they haul their nets in to minimize the impact of the propellers. And guess what? If there's some scarring, they do haul in those areas. They got to haul when there's a little bit more water, so they have to report the times they haul. But, again, we tell the recreational fishermen, hey, because they recover so fast and because this will change, why do we want to close this? And the watermen were actually really happy about this. I get calls every year from the guys saying, how's the grass doing this year? Tell me about it, before they start fishing. So again, we watch this, and again, every year, this was crazy. This is just one area, but look at the length of the scars, 40,000 meters of scars. So that's one site. And we focused on the site that had the most intense scarring. And the last picture, again, this is the other Browns Bay, millions of meters of scar, hundreds of thousands of scar length. But again, once we showed these data and showed how quickly, bam, it stopped. And every year, and I make a presentation to our commission, the OMRC commission. I show them this data, and they provide us some support to keep this program going. Because I basically tell them, you got to watch these guys. I mean, they're out there. They'll do anything they can, to make a buck. And they know we're out there. I think if we stopped, this would be devastating because no one would be out there watching these characters. And they're nice guys, but again, they're watermen. They want to make a buck. We're looking at them all the time. So this again is probably two good examples, but there are many more in terms of permits, shoreline alterations, and all that. How our data are being used by managers, and that's a key thing. The biology is really cool. I mean, I love the biology. I love the ecology. I'm very concerned about what's happening in the bay. But I also like working with the managers because it means that we're really kind of linking to those people that are the users of our data. And to me, it's very rewarding, and enjoy it. So I think that's where we are with this, and I think Brooke is just going to touch base very quickly on some of her stuff.